On the morning of January 24, 1989, the world paused for a few moments to hear, or rather try to hear, the final words of one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, Ted Bundy. Convicted of dozens of brutal murders, Bundy had become one of the most recognizable faces of evil in the 20th century. Yet, in the final hour, when many expected a confession, a plea for forgiveness, or perhaps a final provocation, he hesitated. His silence, or the absence of anything truly shocking, raised profound questions among criminologists, psychologists, and curious onlookers worldwide. What was going through Ted Bundy's mind in that final moment? Did he truly fear death? Did he experience genuine guilt? Or, as many suspect, was his hesitation just another cold act of manipulation, a final gesture of control over his narrative? In this video, we'll delve deep into the mind of Ted Bundy, using the lens of criminal psychology, to try to understand why the man who always had an answer for everything, and a natural talent for theatricality, chose silence or almost silence as his last act. Ted Bundy wasn't just another common criminal. He stood out, unfortunately, as one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. Born in 1946, Theodore Robert Bundy was, at first glance, the picture of normalcy. Intelligent, articulate, charismatic, and with an attractive appearance, he fit everything society wouldn't associate with a serial killer. And that's precisely what made him all the more dangerous. During the 1970s, Bundy terrorized the country with a series of brutal murders, primarily targeting young women. It is estimated that he killed at least 30 victims, although some experts believe the actual number may be much higher. Bundy was also known for his ability to manipulate, lie, and easily convince. He even studied law, used crutches or feigned injury to lure his victims, and even defended himself in court during his trial, a spectacle he clearly enjoyed. The Ted Bundy case captured the attention of psychologists, criminologists, and the general public, primarily because of his ability to function perfectly in society while committing horrific crimes in secret. His duality, between the good guy and the monster, became one of the greatest symbols of what psychology calls functional psychopathy. If you're interested in this type of behavioral analysis and want to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. This way, you can follow our psychological investigations into true crimes and gain a deeper understanding of the minds of people like Ted Bundy. Throughout history, the last words of convicted criminals have always captured public attention. Whether for their symbolic value or an attempt at redemption, these final words are often seen as a rare window into the true essence of the individual facing inevitable death. In some cases, they become famous, perpetuated in popular culture or criminology studies. In others, they reveal sincere regret, denial to the end, or even absolute coldness. In criminal psychology, a convict's final moments are seen as highly revealing. When faced with imminent death, the human brain tends to enter a state of hyper-awareness, where authenticity often comes to the fore. That's why final words can carry such weight. They have the potential to dispel myths, reaffirm personalities, or even suggest that there was something more hidden behind the criminal's mask. In Ted Bundy's case, the world was waiting for something grand. After years of denying his crimes, manipulating interviews, and playing games with the press, there was a collective expectation that he would finally speak the truth. A plea for forgiveness from the victims' families? A shocking confession? Or perhaps something enigmatic befitting his calculating personality? But that's not exactly what happened, and that's precisely where the enigma we'll discuss throughout this video arises. Ted Bundy's execution took place in the early morning hours of January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison in Stark. By then, the case had already become a media phenomenon. Crowds gathered outside the prison holding signs, shouting slogans, and even cheering. Some wore t-shirts emblazoned with slogans like "Roast in Hell, Ted." The atmosphere was almost carnival-like, mixed with anger, relief, and a thirst for justice. The execution was carried out by electric chair, a method still common in Florida at the time. Bundy, 42, had spent nearly a decade on death row, repeatedly appealing to avoid execution. During that time, he gave several interviews, some shocking, in which he even claimed that pornography had influenced him to kill, in a questionable attempt to shift the blame onto external factors. In the days leading up to his execution, Bundy seemed more nervous than ever. He was no longer the cool, articulate man who spoke cynically in court or on camera. His face was more tense, his voice lower, and his expression at times frightened. Even for someone who spent years manipulating everyone around him, the end seemed to finally be eliciting a genuine reaction. It was in this setting, before authorities, witnesses, and an entire country watching, that Ted Bundy walked to his death. And in this tense moment, everything he said, or failed to say, would carry almost symbolic weight. Ted Bundy's last 24 hours were marked by a noticeable change in his behavior, a difference that caught the attention not only of prison officials but also of mental health professionals and journalists who closely followed the case. Until then, Bundy had maintained a calculating, often arrogant demeanor. But in his final moments he seemed to lose that control. According to official reports, Bundy refused his special last meal, a common custom at executions in the U.S., and received only what regular inmates received that day. He also refused visits from family or religious representatives. During the early hours of the morning he showed clear signs of anxiety. He paced his cell, talked to himself, and asked for more time with his lawyers, even though it was already clear that there were no further appeals. This behavior raises many questions. Was he finally confronting the reality of his actions? Or, as some suggest, was he simply trying to postpone the inevitable? Interestingly, even in his final moments, Bundy seemed to hold out hope that something, anything, would spare him the electric chair. The hesitation in his final words seems to reflect precisely this. A man torn between fear, manipulation, and perhaps, on some level, a shred of conscience. Ted Bundy is often cited as one of the clearest examples of a psychopath in criminal literature. Psychopathy is a personality disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, manipulation, impulsive behavior, and a lack of remorse. In Bundy's case, experts believe that his ability to deceive and control people was a classic manifestation of this disorder. Psychologists who studied his behavior emphasize that, despite his coldness and cruelty, Bundy managed to create a public image of charm and normalcy, typical of functional psychopaths. This ability to maintain a socially acceptable facade while committing horrendous crimes illustrates the complexity of his profile. When it comes to the hesitation in his final words, experts are divided. Some suggest that his psychopathy could have led him to feel no fear of death or regret. Others point out that even psychopaths can experience some form of existential anxiety or fear of the unknown when faced with the end. Understanding the role of psychopathy is essential to deciphering Bundy's silence. Did he really hesitate because something in his psychopathic mind failed at that moment, or because he was trying once again to control the situation? A striking characteristic of Ted Bundy's personality, besides psychopathy, is his heightened narcissism. Narcissists tend to have an intense need for control and admiration, often seeing themselves as superior and invincible. Bundy embodied this combination, exhibiting behavior that alternated between grandiosity and contempt for others. During his trial, he positioned himself as the protagonist of a spectacle, even defending himself, using the media to manipulate narratives and frequently mocking justice. Even in his final hours, Bundy subtly sought to maintain control of the situation, a stance typical of someone who refuses to relinquish power, not even in the face of death. This need for control may partly explain the hesitation before his final sentence. Perhaps Bundy was trying to evaluate until the last moment what to say to maintain his image, to ensure he still had one last word that would put him in the spotlight. The silence or hesitation in this case could be interpreted as a way of exerting power over his final moment. This internal struggle between narcissism and the inevitable end is a key piece in understanding the killer's behavior in his final moments. Silence in the face of death, especially for those sentenced to death, is a phenomenon that sparks much interest among psychologists and criminologists. For some, silence can be a form of resistance, a last-ditch attempt to maintain dignity or control the narrative, refusing to give the world what they expect to hear. For others, it can be a sign of internal conflict, a hesitation about their own existence and the inevitability of the end. In Ted Bundy's case, the hesitation before his final sentence may reflect this psychological complexity. Silence can be both a strategy to hide true emotions and a space to process final thoughts. In many accounts, death row inmates display similar behaviors: withdrawal, introspection, and silence, which can signal fear, regret, or simply a shock to reality. Furthermore, silence can function as a defense mechanism for psychopaths and narcissists, protecting their carefully constructed image by avoiding showing vulnerability. So to understand Bundy's silence is to look at an internal battle between the ruthless mask he always wore and the possible humanity that reveals itself when all defenses fall. Ted Bundy was a master at manipulating people and situations to his advantage, and many experts believe his hesitation in his final words may have been a final attempt at control. Even as he faced death, Bundy may have been calculating how his words might impact the public, his victims' families, or even prison staff. The expectation of a gesture of clemency or forgiveness may have actually been a ploy to elicit sympathy or emotionally shake those watching him. This hope, though unlikely at the time, could have kept alive a flame of manipulation that accompanied him throughout his criminal life. Furthermore, throughout his years in prison, Bundy attempted to negotiate interviews and even discuss aspects of his sentence, demonstrating that even in extreme situations he never wavered from using his words as a weapon. His last-minute hesitation may have been a sign that he was trying to find the best way to sell his image, a final theatrical act to remain relevant. Or was it ultimately the awareness of the end that made him fall silent? We'll explore this further in the next topic. When someone is about to face death, fear is a natural reaction, even for the most cold-hearted and calculating criminals. In Ted Bundy's case, his hesitation before his final sentence may indicate a real confrontation with mortality, something his narcissistic and psychopathic mind may not have fully processed until that moment. On the other hand, there's the possibility that the silence signaled genuine regret, though this is difficult to prove, especially considering the killer's track record. Bundy rarely demonstrated public remorse throughout his life, which raises questions about the authenticity of any change in his final moments. Criminal psychology experts suggest that the hesitation may be a combination of these factors: intense fear mixed with a glimmer of awareness about the impact of his crimes. But for a man so accustomed to manipulation and control, this momentary vulnerability is remarkable. If you find it interesting to understand these deep details of human behavior, leave a like. It really helps us keep this type of content here on the channel. Numerous psychiatrists and forensic psychologists have analyzed Ted Bundy over the years, attempting to decipher not only his motivations but also his mental state in the final hours before his execution. Many experts believe that Bundy displayed clear characteristics of antisocial personality disorder combined with pathological narcissism, a combination that explains his lack of empathy and predatory behavior. In his final moments, reports indicate that Bundy was visibly tense, anxious, and introspective, a significant contrast to his usual confident demeanor. Psychiatrists interpret this change as a possible recognition, albeit superficial, of the gravity of his actions and the reality of death. Some professionals suggest that, in the silence before the final sentence, Bundy may have gone through a brief episode of internal conflict, perhaps even a brief moment of psychological vulnerability, something rare in people with his profile but not impossible. These analyses help us understand that even the most ruthless criminals have complex facets, and that the human mind, faced with death, can reveal surprising nuances. Ted Bundy's silence and hesitation in his final words had a profound effect, not only on criminal psychology, but especially on the victims' families and public opinion. For many families, the expectation was that Bundy would express some kind of remorse or apology, a form of closure that might alleviate, even if only minimally, the pain left by his crimes. When Bundy opted for silence or for vague, emotionless words, it was interpreted as a sign of disdain and lack of remorse, reigniting anger and suffering. The lack of a true final confession frustrated those seeking a form of symbolic justice. In the public sphere, Bundy's image as a cold, calculating killer was further solidified. His silence was seen as the ultimate proof of his manipulation and contempt for the system and his victims, reinforcing the narrative that he was incapable of true empathy. This emotional impact is an important part of the psychological analysis of the case, as it shows how a criminal's final behavior can influence the legacy they leave behind, both for society and for those who suffered directly. Ted Bundy wasn't the only serial killer to display hesitation or silence in his final words. When we look at other famous cases such as John Wayne Gacy or Richard Ramirez, we find similar patterns: final moments where silence or partial confession indicate complex internal conflicts. For example, John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, displayed a mixed demeanor, alternating between detailed confessions and absolute silence, suggesting a struggle between the need for control and the fear of total exposure. Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, expressed both insults and pride until the end, but remained silent on his deathbed, leaving many questions unanswered. These cases help us understand that last-minute behavior isn't always straightforward. It can vary depending on each criminal's personality, psychopathology, and personal circumstances. Hesitation can be a form of manipulation, fear, or even a genuine moment of reflection. Therefore, Bundy's silence fits into a broad spectrum of reactions, reinforcing the complexity of the criminal mind in the face of death. Ted Bundy wasn't just a criminal who shocked the world. He also became a fundamental study in criminology and criminal psychology. His case helped expand understanding of serial killer profiles, especially those with psychopathic and narcissistic traits. Analyzing his personality, behavior, and even his final moments has allowed professionals in the field to develop better assessment techniques, behavior prediction, and even interrogation strategies. Bundy demonstrated how superficial charm can hide an extremely dangerous mind, teaching that outward appearances can often be deceiving. Furthermore, the enigma of the hesitation in his final words continues to fuel debates about the nature of regret, fear, and manipulation in high-profile criminals. His psychological legacy influences not only academia but also the way justice systems deal with death row inmates. Studying Bundy is therefore a way to learn more about evil human behavior and the blurred lines between conscience and instinct. Ted Bundy's hesitation in his final words remains one of the most intriguing mysteries in criminal psychology. Was it a moment of cowardice in the face of the inevitable? A final calculation to maintain control and manipulate? Or perhaps a rare moment of consciousness, where even the coldest killer confronts his own humanity? While we may never have a definitive answer, Bundy's silence reminds us that, even in extreme situations, the human mind is a complex and multifaceted territory. He leaves a legacy not only of horror, but also of learning for those who try to understand the boundaries between evil, fear, and redemption. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you think motivated Ted Bundy's hesitation? Was it fear, manipulation, regret, or something else? Leave your comment below. And if you enjoyed this dive into criminal psychology, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next videos. See you next time.